Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and in this episode, I want to talk about how to manage meetings more effectively. So these are just kind of top-line tips. If you, after watching this, have any suggestions of your own, by all means, please hit me up in the comments section or on social media at Phil Svitek, because I certainly would benefit from them, as I know other people who would see it would too. So I would encourage you to do that right off the bat. All right. So number one, oftentimes with meetings, let's just start with the notion, is this meeting even necessary? Too often, I'm not going to say people do it from an ego standpoint, but meetings, if you're leading a meeting, it does make you feel important. I think to a certain extent, we crave human attention, so it can even come from a good place of like you just wanting to interact with other people, because sometimes our day jobs can get lonely and boring, that you're like, well, let's do a meeting because why not, right? We'll interact and so forth. And I don't necessarily think the intention of that is bad, but what's wrong about that is you're not giving people a choice necessarily. You're telling them like you have to come to this meeting and it's important, right? When in fact, there might be a better way to go about the meeting. Like, can you just resolve it over text? Can you resolve it over an email? Can you just do a quick phone call with, one or two people versus multiple people? And that's another thing. Too often, we set meetings with far too many people. Like, a meeting realistically most people say 8. I'm gonna give you some leeway. It shouldn't really have more than 10 people. Why? Because then more than 10, like, not everyone's gonna be participating. Other people are just there to whatever, and they're gonna be confused why they're there and so forth. And if they do get to participate, then it's going to turn into like a 6-hour meeting and so forth, just because of differing thought. So really make sure, A, is the meeting absolutely necessary? B, if it is, who are the essential people that need to be in this meeting, right? So ask yourself that. Also, one of the aspects that we don't often think about is when to schedule such a meeting. Far too often we just go like, oh, whatever's available is for people, let's just do that. But I would encourage you to book meetings based on the purpose of the meeting. So if it's a creative meeting and most of the people that you're working with are most creative in the morning, let's say like 10 a.m., then do it at 10 a.m. If it's more of an administrative meeting and people are, let's do it maybe after lunch. Like, give people the opportunity to realize like well, number one, right, even backtracking, have a clear agenda for the meeting, right? So it goes back to the notion of, is this meeting necessary? If it is, what the hell's the meeting about? So it should have a clear-cut agenda, so that way everyone knows going into it. Therefore, by knowing the agenda, they can be like, okay, this is a creative meeting, this is an administrative meeting, or whatever sort of other thing that I'm omitting at this moment in time. And that will allow them to be like, well, that's a task that I like to deal with, at 3 o'clock, so let's do it then, right? Rather than just like, here's a window of time, let's fucking do the meeting then. Like, no. So that would be a thing I would encourage you to look at. And going back to the agenda, right? The clear cut the agenda, the better. And far too often, I've sat in meetings that don't have an agenda, and therefore, like, I've been in meetings that have gone for like 10 hours. On a Friday. And I'm like, what? And by the way, when I say Friday, I mean the meetings would start at like 2 p.m. on a Friday and go for 10 hours. And it's like, well, and because there's no clear agenda, no one knows when the fucking meeting's going to end. And everyone's just getting tired and bored, and that becomes counterproductive. So have a clear-cut agenda, which then kind of leads into the next thing. Now you can have a more set time limit, right? And I'm not saying like that if things come up and so forth that you have to be so rigid, and if they go slightly over that like if things are really flowing, then, especially with a creative meeting, that you have to cut it off. No, that's not what I'm saying. But have a clear-cut goal of what you're trying to achieve. And as you get to the end, you start to sum it up and also create action steps for people. Because that's the other, like, man, oh man, like I've been in some meetings, like these, as I mentioned, some of these meetings that could have gone like 10 hours and so forth. And because there was no agenda, it meant that we didn't really have priorities. Therefore, like, the action items, we had like a laundry list of 100 action items, but they weren't prioritized. So no one really knew what was important, what wasn't. And yeah, man, that benefits nobody. What I love, Bob Iger has become, he's the former CEO of Disney, he's now the executive chairman, but he, in his memoir for 15 years, The Ride of a Lifetime, this is not the title, I butchered the title, but The Ride of a Lifetime, right? If you look that up in Bob Iger, the book will come up. I'll also link to it down below. The point being, though, he had 3 very specific goals with Disney. And this wasn't just for one meeting. This was an overarching goal for his entire tenure as a Disney CEO. They were, we will create content of the highest quality. We will utilize technology, and we will expand into become a global brand. So the opening of Disney China satisfies the third goal, right? Expand as a global brand. By having Disney in China, that certainly makes it happen. And I'm not just talking about movies, obviously that's the thing, but I'm talking about the actual, like, the theme park, right? The grand opening, that was a monumentous thing. Having content of the highest quality, getting things like Lucasfilm, getting things like Marvel, and so forth. Now Fox, that's quality of the highest caliber, right? And it allowed them to also, and they take that content and expand it to be a global brand, right? These brands, Marvel is a worldwide brand. Star Wars, worldwide brand. So that satisfies 2 of the things. Now, even in that, the way they're making these movies, they're utilizing the best technology, right? So they're going to utilize technology and embrace it. But speaking to that technology standpoint, there's no greater example of this than them going full force with Disney Plus, right? That's certainly taking the quality of content that they have and using technology to its fullest. They weren't going to fall behind. The way they do their theme parks and so forth, they utilize technology, so every idea, every notion that came through to Bob, to his people and so forth, it had to be filtered through these 3 things. Did it satisfy at least one of these 3 things? Because if not, off the table. So that's a clear guiding light. And, so that makes decision. So, I know I've kind of taken a tangent, but the idea, when you set standards such as this, it trickles down. Greg McEwen and other people kind of talk about the notion that rather than trying to make 1,000 decisions, make one decision that can dictate all those decisions. So by Bob Iger setting those 3 decisions, now it set all these things. So that in itself becomes kind of a buffer. So going back to the first notion, is a meeting really necessary? Well, if it doesn't satisfy any of those 3 overall principles, at least one of them, a meeting is not fucking necessary. So you've eliminated the meeting and not wasted people's time. And then you start to see, okay, in the meeting, let's set the agenda so that way we satisfy and really push forward with these things as much as possible. So having that clear agenda, and that way people can focus and whatever else in the meeting, and it's kept to a tight maximum. And it can be kept tight if everyone there is truly absolutely necessary. Man, there's a meeting I went to recently, and it was just someone talking for 2 hours, and it was like, there's nothing new was really added. It just felt like we needed to have like a catch up, but none of the stuff was really valuable. And to that point, like, I think it's important to allow for follow up. I think if you're going to lead a meeting, you have to, rather than just have the whole meeting be one person talking and just updating, you have to allow for a follow-up, because that's what's going to create action steps and so forth, or at least certainly clarify things for people. The meeting in particular, that didn't happen. And I remember turning to the people around me. I was like, why were we part of this meeting, man? None of this was like necessary. And it just and even the emails made it seem like it's such a mandatory thing of like, we got to do this, and for what reason? There's nothing gained, nothing learned, nothing moved forward other than like, here's what's been happening, here's the step. And I understand there's a value to updating people, but legit, those things could have been sent over email, and I would have read them. And I know not everyone reads that stuff, but maybe you do a quick follow-up of like, hey, I just want to, if it was that mandatory, I just need you to respond back with your thoughts on X, Y, and Z. I would have done that, and other people would have too. You can make that mandatory, but like to waste people's time for an extended period of time, man, oh man. Okay, the other things to make a meeting more effective, allow everyone to participate, right? Whether it's questions, putting out ideas, and secondly to that, don't knock other people's ideas. So if you're in a meeting and someone brings up something, don't knock someone else's idea or notion if you don't have something better, because then it prevents that person from participating in the future because they're just going to be, slapped down. And also, don't interrupt people. It happens far too often. I remember sitting and leading these various meetings, and having been a leader for many things throughout my life, I remember certain meetings, and there were two parties, and this one person always kept trying to say something, and person two, every time the person would say something, would jump on it. And it didn't matter if it was encouraging or discouraging. Even if it was encouraging, it's like you're still discouraging the person from talking. And after a while, that took a toll, and I would, admittedly, I had some work to do with it, and I didn't always handle it the best way, but I would try to be like, okay, stop, person two, let person one speak, and then we'll get back to you. But if you are someone in that situation, because I've been in that situation where I've been in meetings and people have just talked ad nauseum and so forth, and I tend to be much more reserved. But now I use it as a strategy, because if people just keep talking and all of a sudden I try to get in a word edgewise, and if, after 2 or 3 times they cut me off, then I become forceful with care in my voice of like, okay, now this is the 3rd time you've cut me off. I've listened to you speak for the past 45 minutes. If you don't value my opinion right now, then I'm going to walk out, or you're going to listen to me. And that makes people listen and rethink their thoughts. So that would be a strategy that I would encourage you, maybe word it slightly differently or word it to your voice, but it has worked for me in the past. The other thing, people often go on tangents too often, and that's a symptom of not having a clear-cut agenda. Everyone in the meeting should be, with that agenda, be able to police something. Everyone should act as the buffer, the police, to be like, okay, that's off topic. Now, people should be smart enough to recognize if a tangent someone's going off on is actually good, or if it is just a completely true that will eventually help the greater whole, or we're just going to go in a completely different direction. I remember one time we were talking about, just keeping it kind of relatively generic, the quality of a show that we were working on. And suddenly that led to hey, we should make this rig. And it was those two are completely unrelated. We've just literally just switched topics without. It's one thing. It would be one thing. What irked me about that, it would be one thing if we got to sort of a conclusion, a consensus, an action step with the thing that we were talking about. Someone just completely tried to switch midway through. And what's crazy to me about in that meeting, people followed that rabbit hole, and I felt like a fucking crazy about it. I was like, whoa, wait, we just keep opening up item after item after item, get to no place of resolution whatsoever, not even action steps. What the fuck is happening? And then we end up in a meeting, might as well have been fucking 2 days long of what the fuck is happening? Now, mind you, long meetings are fine if you're at a retreat. A retreat is different. A retreat is dedicated to that. Which kind of brings up the notion of try to have meetings beyond just the office. Give a different environment, because that will allow for different energy. Not always. There's times you need to have it in the office, but don't be afraid to have meetings in different places. And the other thing that I just can't stand, and this is a symptom of the fact that not everyone's necessary in the meeting. Oftentimes, the people that feel like they're unnecessary to the meeting start multitasking. I fucking hate multitasking in a fucking goddamn meeting. I do. I'm sorry. It just I just blew up right there because of how much it triggers me. Because then, we've all so if and again it's a symptom. It's like a culmination of all these things. If the meeting's unnecessary, then people feel that. If they feel they're unnecessary to the meeting, if the meeting is necessary, then they're gonna feel that. If there's tangents and so forth, and if the meeting's long, then it's like, people start multitasking. But if everyone's there with a clear-cut agenda, we can all roll up our sleeves and achieve the fucking agenda. Therefore, there shouldn't be a fucking need to multitask. There just shouldn't. And if meetings are done effectively, that would never fucking happen. But too many times, just so many fucking bullshit meetings happen. And I get so passionate because we're fucking wasting our lives with dumb fucking meetings that don't mean jack shit. So let's time to stop it. Keep these things in mind. And as I said at the top, if there's any other things that I missed that you think are really important, please let me know. Obviously, this is a topic I'm very passionate about. So if there's any suggestions you have, let me know. Let's let's make it a goal of ours to end needless meetings everywhere, however that may be. If you find this beneficial and think someone else would too, by all means share it with them. If you find any of the stuff that I do beneficial, then I encourage you to subscribe or follow if you haven't already done so. That way you get the various stuff that I'm doing right when I put it out, and you never miss anything. But yeah, if nothing else, I want to appreciate you for joining me. I hope I have been of benefit to your life, and I hope to see you next time.